Well, you just couldn't call, could you, Magus? You just couldn't help out a few thousand or million people who are going to go hungry and are going to live in the street.
Canada didn't raise flags or issue threats. They quietly passed 7 laws, and within less than 2 months, multiple US states began to reel. Many people looked toward Canada and thought it all started there, but look more closely and you'll see this collapse was incubated within America itself. Because in Washington, D.C., the Big Beautiful Bill was signed, and immediately over 17 million Americans faced the risk of losing healthcare and housing assistance. The most vulnerable were now the ones left behind. So what were the 7 laws passed by Canada? Why did they hit states like Florida, Texas, and Michigan so hard? And most importantly, how will this affect the house you live in or the insurance you depend on? The answer lies just ahead, and if you're living in America in 2025, you can't miss this video. The 7 Canadian laws and the final blow came from within the US itself. In a short span, Canada quietly passed 7 new laws. No media storm, no noisy debate, but the consequences were enough to shake the lives of many of us. The digital platform tax targeted platforms like Google and Meta, but the impact fell on small shops and local agencies where many over 50s work, invest, or own businesses. The Travel Safety Designation Act sharply reduced Canadian tourist traffic to Florida and New York. For families who used to rent out winter apartments or work in service industries and tourist zones, this was no longer a warning but a tightening financial reality. The Import Sanitation Ban and Energy Export Licensing Act made things worse. Agricultural goods were returned. Electricity from the north was reduced. Utility bills in Minnesota and Michigan rose by 15 to 18%. Many elderly people in rural areas began having to choose between paying for electricity or buying medication. The remaining 3 laws, Tourism and Media Shield Border Rights Protection Law and Automatic Tariff Trigger, continued to choke off the remaining sectors, tourism, logistics, and manufacturing. When businesses dare not sign long-term contracts and goods are delayed due to border paperwork that directly affects jobs in industrial towns. But the most concerning blow didn't come from outside. Right at home, the Big Beautiful Bill was just passed with the goal of restructuring the welfare system. The result? An estimated 17 million Americans, mostly the elderly freelancers or low-income workers, will lose insurance entirely. Small hospitals began to overflow. Drug prices rose, and families who once believed they would be protected now have to fend for themselves. In the next part, we'll look at the 6 states hit hardest and why these places crumbled so quickly. Number 1, Florida. When the retirement paradise becomes a twilight nightmare, Florida used to symbolize peaceful aging, the place where Americans retired, where Canadians escaped the cold, and where both met for warm afternoons by the sea. But in 2025, everything is changing. Not with noise, not overnight collapse, but with a steady decline starting from things that once seemed minor. 3 of the 7 Canadian laws are directly impacting Florida. The Travel Safety Designation Act advised citizens to avoid U.S. states considered unsafe or unstable. The Tourism and Media Shield froze all promotional funding for U.S. destinations. And the digital platform tax raised advertising costs, forcing small Canadian travel firms to cut back on campaigns targeting the South. The result, according to the Financial Times, Canadian bookings in Florida dropped by 25%. The snowbirds, retired Canadians who wintered there, disappeared. Investment apartments sat vacant. Beachside restaurants shortened their hours, and local budgets once fueled by tourism taxes began to plunge. At the same time, an internal American blow landed the Big Beautiful Bill, a federal budget reform law passed in early July, cut hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid and SNAP nationwide. In Florida alone, nearly 4.2 million people are on Medicaid, mostly seniors, veterans, and the disabled. Hospitals warned of ER overcrowding with wait times potentially doubling. Some facilities in Tampa and Orlando cut beds, diagnostic services, and stopped accepting new uninsured patients. Imagine this. You've retired, you have Medicare, Medicaid, a small beachfront apartment, some savings. But now your insurance premium is up, your power bill is up, your hospital is overloaded, your family doctor quits, and your apartment is empty all season. You've paid taxes your whole life, done everything right. And when you finally need protection, you have to choose between medicine and food. Worse, the atmosphere in Florida is shifting. As immigration detention centers rise supervised using controversial methods, some even deploying alligators to prevent escapes under a strict camp model, people are no longer just talking about immigration.
It can hold around 5,000 people, and if ICE is deporting 3,000 a day, within 2 days, it's gonna be packed.
Locals themselves are beginning to feel watched. The tourist vibe is being replaced by a sense of control. From immigrants shut out of the legal system to native-born Americans pushed out of the healthcare system, everyone is starting to ask, do I still belong here? Many who once hoped for snowbirds each season are now quietly seeking to leave Florida. Not for leisure, but for survival. Florida is undergoing a silent transformation where what was once an advantage has now become a burden. And if a sunny, tourist-heavy, resource-rich state like Florida can no longer maintain stability, who will be next? Number 2, Michigan. When the creators of value are left behind. If you've ever lived around Detroit Grand Rapids or Flint, you know this feeling. The stamping machines used to roar every morning. The lights in the factories came on before the sun. Coffee brewed in steel thermoses, and the assembly lines ran like a heartbeat. In Michigan, people don't ask for luxury, just a stable job, basic health insurance, and enough money to raise their kids and send them to school. But in 2025, even those simple things are becoming luxuries. When Canada passed the automatic tariff trigger and border rights protection law, the supply chain between Windsor and Detroit began to clog. According to Bloomberg, orders for parts from Canada dropped by more than 30% in just a few weeks. You can see it clearly if you drive past the factories in Jackson, Lansing, or Flint. Places that used to run 3 shifts a day, now half the lines have shut down. Workers are on rotation. Some have to take night shifts in plants 50 miles from home. Others are sending their kids to other states because they can no longer afford the cost of living. Then in July, the second blow landed. The big beautiful bill was enacted, cutting Medicaid and SNAP significantly. Ask anyone who relies on company-provided insurance. Just a 2-3 week furlough means losing support altogether. According to Michigan Advance, nearly 200,000 people in this state may lose their health insurance this year alone. But what makes people angrier is who's being protected and who's being left behind. Big businesses still get tax breaks. Quarterly profits keep rising. Meanwhile, the workers, the ones directly creating the products, are being removed from the priority list. The silence of major corporations in the face of these cuts makes many feel like their labor only mattered while they were producing, and they're forgotten the moment they get sick, take time off, or need help. You don't need statistics to understand what's happening. Just open your medicine cabinet and see the prescriptions you haven't filled. Look at your dinner table and see that the main dish has been cut. Call your kid's school and hear, we're short on teachers. Please understand. And then you ask yourself, what did I do wrong? You worked 10 hours a day without complaint. You fixed mistakes without being asked. You paid every cent of your taxes, didn't cheat, didn't dodge. And you believed, like generations of Americans before you, that if you lived right when the time came, America would protect you. But now when workers need support businesses, the very ones that grew because of your effort, choose silence. No statements when Medicaid is slashed. No promises to retain staff. Because for them, healthcare costs don't touch profits. But for you, they're a matter of survival. Maybe it's time companies didn't just receive, but gave back. Not just protected by policy, but responsible for those who helped them rise. Number 3. Texas, where darkness falls while the rest of America stays lit. Texas, July, a power bill nearing $900. A man in his 60s has to choose between blood pressure medication and the roaring air conditioner in the corner. Outside, the heat pushes 40 degrees C. Inside, life is nearing overload. Once called America's energy gas station, Texas took pride in its independent grid, oil fields, natural gas, wind, and solar. Everything could be produced right within the state. But by mid-2025, that very pride has become a burden for millions of households. When Canada passed the Energy Export Licensing Act, the flow of gas and electricity from the north was tightened. Several LNG projects in Texas, like Port Arthur and Rio Grande, expected to launch later this year, are now delayed or frozen. According to Reuters, over 14 gas projects worth billions of dollars have been affected. At the same time, electricity and fuel export contracts, a traditional strength of Texas, are also facing barriers as trade relations between the two countries grow tense. Everything ground to a halt so quickly no one could react in time. Around 3,000 oil and gas workers in Midland lost their jobs in June alone. Engineers, drillers, operations managers, people who once believed Texas was a land where you'd never be unemployed, are now knocking on unemployment office doors for the first time in decades. The fallout is spreading. Lunch spots are empty, auto repair shops are closing, early trade, schools are delaying new classes because companies aren't hiring. As the economy contracts, people face another pressure, this time from inside their own homes, the electric bill. ERCOT, the agency managing the Texas grid, warned of potential power shortages in the summer, especially during peak hours. Electricity prices soared, forcing families to turn off air conditioners, shorten cooking times, or sit silently in stifling homes. Reports from Houston show nearly 80% of low to middle income households have had to cut essential expenses to pay for electricity, averaging about $165 a month, far higher than the national average. This is no longer just a problem for the poor. Even those with stable jobs, those who operated million-dollar machinery, are now asking, why do I have to choose between medication and air conditioning? Why must I burn through my savings just to keep my family from collapsing in the heat? Meanwhile, data centers, AI companies, and large energy corporations are still growing. Servers continue to consume millions of kilowatt hours daily. Profits keep flowing into quarterly reports. But the burden of electricity is passed down to each household. Every elderly person living alone in a red brick house, every single mother scraping together dinner. And right at that moment, the big beautiful bill is passed, cutting nearly $4 billion from energy, healthcare, and housing support programs for southern states. The Berchake call for costward for pump cheat 3, including Texas. Funds like LEHAB, which helped people pay power bills, have been frozen. Those who once relied on assistance now stare at $700 or $900 on paper and wonder, how much longer can I hold on? Texas has long stood for self-reliance. People here don't ask for much. They just want to work, support themselves, and keep their families safe. But when even a state that produces electricity can't keep prices within reach of its own people, a sense of helplessness starts to set in. You won't hear loud complaints, but if you pass through a small town out west, you'll see empty parking lots near drill sites, for sale signs on once busy storefronts, kids no longer in summer classes because schools are understaffed, and piles of bills, medical electric medication, stacking up in the same drawer waiting for adults to decide which one is the priority to survive. Texas is still a symbol of energy, but now that very energy is scorching homes, homes that people once believed were safe. And then there's a truth that's hard to accept in the middle of the 21st century in a country with iPhone satellites and hundreds of billions in defense budgets. There are still communities losing power due to overload or because they simply can't afford it. Say it aloud and no one in the world might believe it, but in Texas 2025, it's happening every day. You can live in the heart of the world's tech superpower and still have to cook by flashlight. You can hail an Uber order from Amazon and yet soak a cold towel to press against your family's forehead because you can't turn on the AC. These contradictions don't just make people fear the heat. They fear the feeling that America is growing richer while they are growing poorer. When the lights go out in a neighborhood and the whole block falls into darkness in 40 degrees heat, people begin to see not just exhaustion, but a glimpse of the near future. A future where modernity no longer guarantees security. A future where those who once built the American dream are being left behind in the dark. Number 4. Iowa, where agriculture is thirsty for hope. In the middle of summer, the soil remains soft, the sky remains beautiful, but people are growing weary. No market, no support, no future. A silent field, not because of drought, but because its owner has surrendered to invisible forces, taxes, debt laws, and decisions made thousands of miles away. Iowa has long been a symbol of diligent America. Not flashy like New York, not powerful like Texas, but every meal on an American family's table carries a trace of this place. A kernel of corn, a slice of meat, a spoonful of beans, a drop of milk. Agriculture is the backbone here, not only economically, but as a way of growing up, living, and leaving something for the next generation. But in 2025, that backbone is beginning to fracture. After Canada passed the import sanitation ban, hundreds of tons of American beef, pork, and agricultural products were turned away at the border for failing to meet new standards. This is not the first time goods have been rejected, but never at such scale. According to the National Livestock Association, pork exports to Canada have dropped nearly 9% in just 2 months. 1/3 of Iowa's distributors once relied on the Canadian market. Now they have no orders forcing slaughterhouses to cut shifts and farmers to dump inventory. At the same time, fertilizer prices have skyrocketed due to tax retaliation, especially potash, an essential fertilizer of which over 85% previously came from Canada. Now, the cost of each planting season has increased by thousands of dollars, while output prices remain unchanged. Add to that transportation, cross-border trucks are tightly inspected. Logistics costs soar, and U.S. farm goods become far less competitive. All the pressure falls on the farmer, the final link in the chain whom everyone assumes will manage somehow. But this year they can't manage anymore. One farm takes down its egg for sale sign. Another posts a tractor on the internet. Small signs, but they speak volumes. Farmers are retreating from their own land, and as a final internal blow, Big Beautiful Bill to the neue the new federal law, allocates not a single dollar for emergency agricultural relief. Instead, most incentives are tailored for big businesses, data companies, energy producers, while farmers continue struggling with fertilizer output markets and healthcare. It is hard to understand why, when an agricultural economy is faltering, policy only looks to technology and profits. The people don't ask for much, just to keep their land, have a doctor within a few dozen miles and a viable market so they're not selling at a loss. But when even those basics are no longer guaranteed, trust falls with every failed harvest. Lose a job, you might get unemployment. Lose land, you lose your roots, your family, and your way of life. In Iowa, farmers don't just grow crops. They sustain communities with the belief that the next generation will carry on. But now ask yourself, if you were a farmer, would you want your child to grow up facing endless bills? Would you let them enter a profession where planting means loss and harvest brings fear of bankruptcy? Farm bankruptcies in this state have risen over 20% compared to last year. Land prices in some central counties have dropped nearly 15%. Banks are starting to seize assets. And these aren't just numbers. They are the quiet grief of seeing your name on a foreclosure notice. Iowa isn't collapsing overnight. It's slowly eroding. Harvesters no longer run small towns, lose their pharmacies, then their schools, then their only gas station. No one says anything, but everyone knows. When no one sows the field, that place is no longer home. Meanwhile, support packages keep getting announced, but not for corn growers or cattle ranchers. Those budget lines flow to tech giants, energy corporations, and financial investors. They call it innovation. But Iowa doesn't need innovation. Iowa just needs to survive. Because if a state like Iowa, with its land people, tradition, and devotion, still cannot hold on to its farmland, then what future awaits those places with nothing but dependence on goods from elsewhere? Number 5. New York, a place everyone dreams of, but now. Even New Yorkers are trying to leave. Not because of natural disasters, not because of war, but because a city that once symbolized energy, opportunity, and entrepreneurial spirit is becoming too expensive, not just in money, but in faith. With thousands of tech media and finance companies headquartered here, New York was once the heart of the US economy. But when Canada passed the digital services tax targeting revenue from platforms like Google, Meta, and Amazon, the consequences didn't stop at the border. Startups in Manhattan, once reliant on customers from the north, were forced to adjust expansion plans while investors began to hesitate. Even though Canada temporarily postponed the law at the end of June, the disruption had already triggered a slow but persistent capital withdrawal. Co-working spaces once packed with data engineers, freelancers, and founders now feel unusually empty. Midtown, once bustling, is now eerily quiet. Class B and C office buildings already hard to fill since the pandemic are once again up for sale. It seems the energy that once kept the city that never sleeps alive is beginning to dim. Urban middle-class residents feel the shift most clearly. A fintech engineer in her 40s, once earning over $120,000 a year in Flatiron, is now working part-time. No longer able to afford $3,500 rent in Brooklyn, and having lost her private insurance, she must scrutinize every expense, every medical checkup. For many like her, the New York dream is no longer a symbol of success, but a monthly struggle for survival. When income drops, health insurance is often the first thing to go. And then even a mild illness can become an unsolvable problem. The modern healthcare system is no longer a safety net. It's a luxury for many residents who once prided themselves on being educated, skilled, and with a future. Meanwhile, investment funds are starting to shift. Some are pulling out of New York, others are pouring into lower-cost states like Texas and Arizona, or even into Canada itself, which is now trying to attract tech talent with new incentive policies. A sad irony, while the US has yet to adjust its laws to retain small businesses, its rival has seized the opportunity to claim them. It's not just startups, ordinary families are retreating too. A family of 4 in Queens had to sell their home and move to suburban New Jersey, unable to keep up with taxes, tuition insurance, and daily expenses. The husband, an ad freelancer, just lost a contract. The wife, an AI engineer, had her project pulled. People who once lived in brightly lit city towers are now choosing the suburbs, hoping simply to survive, not to thrive. And those who remain, they're holding on, but visibly weary. According to NYC, health hospital admissions due to financial stress rose 15% in the most recent quarter. Many are for the first time waiting hours at low-cost clinics or delaying treatment just to avoid more medical bills. The city still has its lights at Subway, and Starbucks opens every morning, but what's fading is the sense of being protected, and that's what sets New York apart from other places. This isn't just a story of the poor or blue-collar workers. These are people who once stood on startup stages, signed 6-figure contracts, and believed that with enough effort they belonged here. When even they begin to plan their exit, then we must ask what is really happening. Because when faith erodes in the very place that once embodied ambition, the loss is no longer measured in dollars, but in identity. New York hasn't lost its skyline, but if no one wants to light up those buildings anymore, is the city still itself? The city still lives, but it lives in a state of caution. When residents choose delivery work over returning to tech, when data science graduates consider part-time jobs at convenience stores, it's no longer just an economic cycle problem. It's a sign of a deeper decline in expectations, the very fuel that once powered New York. If a city that once drew talent from around the world now becomes a place people must leave to survive, then perhaps the real concern isn't about taxes, rent, or utility bills. It's what's left to keep people staying. We've now covered nearly all the states being pushed into crisis, each with its own kind of wound. And now comes the final name. The one many thought was the most stable, but is fracturing in a place once believed unbreakable. Number 6, Minnesota. When every generation collapses. A small football field in northern Minnesota just officially shut down due to a lack of children. The local school decided to hold classes only 4 days a week. The library opens every other day. The lumber mill next to the gas station went dark back in April. This isn't a scene from an old documentary, it's what's happening in mid-2025, in a state once known as a symbol of peace and decency. Minnesota once proudly called itself the land of 10,000 lakes, where small communities thrived on sweat and a shared belief that if you did things right, you would be protected. But now the cold here doesn't just come from the weather, it comes from the very policies and trade flows that are quietly washing away everything people spent decades building. The first blow came from the north. Canada passed the Green Manufacturing Standards package, tightening exports of wood and light industrial goods, forcing dozens of factories in Duluth, St. Cloud, and Rochester to shut down in Q2 for 2025. According to the Minnesota Manufacturing Association, at least 19 factories have ceased operations, leaving thousands unemployed almost overnight. No fanfare, no warnings, just machines winding down, and the blank stares of people who once thought the factory would last until retirement. In a town like Aitkin, where the factory was the local economic heart, its closure brought everything else down with it. Buses stopped running. The clinic reduced its hours. The grocery store closed temporarily. Families that once lived securely on weekly wages now rely on church packages or stand in pantry lines every weekend. The community once the pride of the Midwest is losing its very ability to exist. By mid-2025, Minnesota's unemployment rate had risen to 3%, seemingly not high, but a red alert for a state that long held the lowest rate in the country. The issue isn't just no jobs, it's the feeling of no longer being needed. Many middle-aged workers who'd spent 20 to 30 years at the factory now face the reality that their skills no longer match the new production model. Some companies moved offices or warehouses to cheaper labor regions. Those left behind feel shut out of the modern machine, not because they're unqualified, but because they're no longer part of the economic equation. Community healthcare systems in rural counties are also collapsing. The Big Beautiful Bill signed in early July slashed billions from Medicaid and low-income medical support. The result, 80% of Minnesota's rural counties are now classified as medically underserved. In Itasca, there's only one family doctor for over 4,000 residents. Health checkups, already hard to access, are now even further out of reach. This coming winter, the elderly will have to choose buy blood pressure medicine or pay the heating bill. Reports from the Minnesota Center for Rural Policy show depression rates up 22% in Q2, but not many seek help because they don't believe help is coming. They're not discouraged by personal failure, but by the feeling of being ignored by the system. In a town of only 3,000 people, the loss of one factory can be enough to throw the whole community into disarray. There are no super cities there, no skyscrapers, just small towns surviving on honest labor and a recurring question: are we still a state or just a fading name on the map? The people here don't protest in anger. They quietly withdraw from the local football team, stop donating to the church, and send their children to live with relatives in other states. This isn't a loud collapse. It's a quiet unraveling, and that makes it all the more frightening. Policymakers call this a green economic transition. But for communities like Minnesota, it means losing schools, losing hospitals, and losing any reason to stay. A generation that once placed its trust in the system is now beginning to wonder if I'm not being kept, who is being prioritized. We've just concluded a journey through the 6 states most deeply affected by new trade policies and internal changes within America. But the bigger question still lies ahead. If that many states are already shaking, if both the tech center and the agricultural belt are trembling, where's the overall picture heading? And we those who once believed in the American dream, do we still have enough reason to stay? That will be the final part of this journey, when the larger picture is drawn from the small cracks that have spread across the map. And sometimes the deepest crack appears in the place we thought was safest. A bleak future has come into view. There was no explosion to signal collapse. Just one day, the elderly in Florida couldn't afford their insulin. A week later, workers in Michigan lined up for food aid. Then by the 3rd month, single mothers in Iowa were scraping together coins to buy eggs. If you visit those states now, no need to go to big cities. Just stop by a small town and you'll see change is quietly eating away at everyday life. And none of them ever thought they would end up like this. The first to feel the shift are often those who've lived long enough to realize they're being left behind. Retirees, technical workers, drivers, farmers, middle-class laborers. People who once believed that as long as they worked hard, they'd have a stable life. But now with Medicaid cuts, soaring electricity bills, food shortages, and vanishing social support, a lifetime of work no longer seems enough to keep them standing. If you've ever thought about retiring in Florida, try imagining this. This winter, you must choose between turning on the heater or paying for your heart medication. In Michigan Auto Assembly Line, workers now wait their turn for donated rice. In Texas, many households must choose between dinner and paying the doubled electricity bill. These choices aren't for the lazy, they're for people who no longer have any choices left. According to Feeding America, food aid applications in 4 major states have risen 22% in just the past 2 months. But statistics don't convey what it feels like for a father to hide his child because he can't afford after-school classes. They don't show the look a wife gives her husband after losing their health insurance, too scared to mention the growing pain in her chest. And if you think you're still doing fine, ask yourself, do you have a retirement plan? A savings account? And if the nearest hospital shuts down, where will you go? If your company closes due to rising material costs, can you switch careers? Today it's someone else's story, but tomorrow it could be yours. Meanwhile, a quiet but undeniable reality is unfolding. Americans are starting to think about leaving. Not to get rich, but to find stability again. Immigration law firms in northern states confirmed that inquiries about moving to Canada, especially from retirees, IT engineers, and skilled workers, are increasing weekly. If you live in Minnesota or North Dakota, you'll notice small businesses beginning to sign electricity contracts with Canadian firms. Not because they prefer it, but because no one in the US offers stable, affordable rates anymore. Small grocery stores are importing produce directly from the north, not out of some foreign goods preference, but because they can no longer source American-grown products. Canada is beginning to fill the gaps America is exposing. Meanwhile, Americans continue to shoulder the weight of medical bills, electricity, food, and a system that's increasingly hard to trust. Some states are taking action. Michigan proposed an emergency fund for auto workers. Texas is requesting federal energy subsidies. Florida is trying to keep snowbirds with property tax breaks. but these are only temporary patches. When millions lose faith in their ability to be protected, isolated policies can't mend the cracks spreading across America's map. Canada's new laws have made things harder for us, but the biggest, deepest fractures come from within. When citizens lose health coverage, when small towns go quiet, when people who've worked hard all their lives are living on food stamps, maybe it's time to re-examine ourselves. This is no longer about numbers or policies. It's about people. How can we ensure they still feel seen, still feel valued? If those who once carried society, the workers, farmers, drivers, teachers, begin to lose faith, then we must ask how much of what once made America great can we still hold on to? We share these truths not to incite fear or division, but to reflect honestly and openly on what's happening and whether anything can still be done to change course. We hope this information will help communities respond thoughtfully and in time.